Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those who are here for the first time, welcome. I'm Christina. We are Sona, the third generation workforce management software built specifically for social care. We work with customers like Exclusive Collection, Glen Eagles, United Response, Community Integrated Care, Yorkshire Care, and many more. Thank you all for attending, and hopefully this is a topic that resonates with a lot of people. We're so happy to have Radar Healthcare's Rhian Bulmer today, and she's going to introduce herself in just a minute, but I'll do a bit of really quick housekeeping. So as always, the chat function is available to everyone, and we really encourage you to say hello to our lovely speakers, to ask any questions that come to mind. We'll be monitoring the chat and answering any questions, so please feel free to comment. We're gonna be recording this webinar, so don't worry if you have to drop out early or anything like that, because it will be in your email afterwards. And finally, I have to add that all the views expressed in today's webinar and presentation reflect only the speaker's views and not the wider views of their employer or organization. So with that out of the way, I'm going to let Richard take it from here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christina. Hi, everyone. My name's Richard. I'm the head of product here at Sona. So I look after everything that is that we're building and making sure we continue to deliver value to our customers, as Christina mentioned, especially in health and social care. But perhaps more interestingly, I spent the last 10 years in health and social care. I started in the care homes and then latterly procuring and implementing tech solutions, so finding things to try and make life easier for residents and for staff. And actually, particularly pertinent to the conversation with Rhian today, I spent a reasonable amount of time for an organisation that didn't invest heavily in tech, trying to make forms and other sort of bespoke systems for auditing, which had a lot of challenges. I would have sold my left arm for Radar or something similar at the time, I think, whilst I was doing that. But I think that's quite enough about me and my background. I will hand over to Rhian.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Rhian. I'm Chief Partnerships Officer at Radar Healthcare. So for those who don't know, Radar Healthcare is quality, safety, risk, and compliance solutions with overarching analytics. And we work in a kind of theory of having this open methodology of linking with all best practice providers. So it's great to be here today with Sona and to be able to talk to you about the kinds of work we might look to do with one another. My background comes from, I've worked in health tech most of my career and have seen lots of scenarios where tech companies get really big and then try to do everything and try to be everything to all people. And actually our approach and the approach I've seen work historically is a much more ecosystem type of approach and working with best of breed systems and starting to build out all these different suppliers working together so that you feel you have a seamless interaction as customers, but we're working across organisations together. So it's great to be here and hear your questions, hopefully, and anything that you have in the chat as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. To get everyone using the chat and get started, I'm going to address what it's not the elephant in the room, but the interesting artwork behind me. Forgive me, I'm in a shared co-working space today. I've landed on, for those that get the reference, I think I look like Sideshow Mel from The Simpsons with the bone through his hair. I'd love, it realised it maybe ages me about what was on TV at the time when I was growing up. I'd love in the chat if we could get, what was it? What was your go-to show that you watched? Me and Rhian were just catching up about this before the webinar, but Rhian, before we get into it, what was your go-to cartoon as a kid?
Well, I'm not going to go for a cartoon and I'm going to give away my age quite horrifyingly, but it was Neighbours, 5 o'clock every night. And if you were on holiday, you got to watch it at lunchtime and then the repeat at tea time. It was a game changer.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm seeing Lou there. Super Ted was I had a VHS of Super Ted. Anyway, I will please keep them coming in. I may shout some of them out in the chat, but I will try not to make the full hour just reminiscing.
It's a pretty cool way to spend an hour.
So, and again, with the chat, please do. I've done a few of these webinars for those that have been on before, and there's often a panel. We always try and get to everyone's questions, but this is much more sort of an open conversation between the two of us. So if the conversation's going in an angle you're particularly interested in, please do pile on and ask questions that you'd like either of us to address. We'd be more than happy to do so. I'll kick things off with, I guess, sort of the big question that everything hangs off. Rhian, in your perspective, so why does scheduling and workforce management, why does it align with risk and safety solutions at all in the first place?
Well, there's probably two ways you could take that question. One is there's the transactional element, because there's inherent risks around compliance of workforce, or lack of compliance around workforce, training records, DBS checks, those kinds of things, breach of working hours, all of those kinds of things represent a transactional relationship that automatically would result in a risk or incident being flagged and investigated or looked at. So there's a transactional relationship, but actually, probably more pertinently, there's the relationship of looking at that information and being able to see workforce information against other quality information helps you look at future trends. It helps you look at exactly what's going on with a given area, so you will be able to see not just where risks are or where incidents have happened, but actually exactly what's going on in your workforce from a very high strategic level. For example, agency usage, skills mix, all those kinds of things. But also it lets you start to be able to investigate some of the kind of more subtle nuances around, do you just have a really exhausted workforce, which we know is a given actually, but where's the data that's showing that, and how do we get to be able to manage that risk in a really granular kind of way that helps everybody understand what's going on at a real given moment in time. So there's so many synergies that we could talk about today. I'm going to let you decide where best to start.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I love the idea of talking about sort of if we start with the agency piece specifically. So it's around in scheduling. So in a system like Sona, it can be really nice and easy to start to see how many people you've got in the building, and that's what we sort of index towards. And importantly, covering all of those shifts, whether that's with your own staff ideally, or whether you need to go out to agency. And I've thought about that problem for a long time from the workforce management lens, and making sure that it's as easy as possible to get people working those shifts. And I guess it'd be interesting on your stake, as you were saying, like, where do you see the risk on, well, I filled my 5 carers that I need today, or my 2 nurses, or whatever it might be, but actually 4 out of those 5 are agency. And I think perhaps from a workforce management perspective, there can be the lens of, I filled those shifts, success. How do you look at that from the risk side, like as in who's working those shifts and what that makeup is of the team?
I think it's really important to see the makeup of the teams from skills mix, from who's working, because you start to be able to see recurrent themes and be able to drill into it that actually you might not even notice specifically when you're working on shifts or when you're in the thick of things, and be able to step above it. It's that ability to step above it and get that perspective and use the data rather than hypotheses or anecdotal discussions to be able to help inform those decisions, specifically at board level or management level or ward level or whatever that might be.
Fantastic. And as you were saying earlier when you were talking, do you see that coming in a system like Radar? Is that sort of from the combined power of the reporting when it comes to seeing that skills mix? That how do you get that information? I guess it's like we can understand and we can share that information around who's working. How do you get that up? Is it transactional data triggering events, or is that just something where actually you can sit back at the end of the month and start comparing, well, these events did happen, and concurrent whilst they were happening, this is what the mix looked like, and start to spot trends? What does that piece look like?
I mean, I think in an ideal world, it's probably both, because you want to be as on the front foot as possible. But the reality of the situation at the moment is everybody's kind of busy at the front line, delivering care, doing what needs to be done. And then when there is time, it's quite difficult to pull together all that disaggregated information and get those views and know what was live and what wasn't, and have that kind of data map of where you're getting the different sets of data from and being able to pull it all together. So in my mind, to get to a point where you can have that at a touch of a button, so when you're in some kind of meeting, you can press a button and pull all those data sets together and be sure of its efficacy, to know that it's helping you make really good decisions. That's the kind of pinnacle of where we want to be. You can feed the transactional stuff day to day, but that's done anyway, where, in different forms. It's being able to get all that data in as near real time as possible that's got the most benefit, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that speaks here to the tech ecosystem, our tech map that Christine is sharing on the screen here. So this starts to show that, and I think, Rhian, without putting words in your mouth, that sort of the point there is all of these systems have great data. And as you start to, different companies are in different places on their tech journey and the digital transformation. But as you start to put these systems in, it's one thing to start putting in these systems and capturing their data in isolation and what that means. But actually the power really does come from this concept of an ecosystem. And I do need to see, or I can make better informed decisions if I start comparing data in system X with what's going on in system Y and pulling it all together. Would you say?
Yeah, and it's not, because the biggest frustration, I think, from all organisations, whether that's big acute trusts through to big corporate groups to smaller groups, it's about where's all that different data coming from. And it's interesting, the previous meeting this morning, we'd had a discussion with an NHS trust about, everybody kind of says, oh, I want to be able to get this dashboard and I want to be able to see this. And everyone talks in dashboard terms and how great it would be. And the creation of a dashboard probably takes about 10 minutes, realistically. I'm being glib to make that statement, but it's pretty easy to do that. And to be able, if you've got the right person pulling the data together, it's being able to take a step back and track the data sets that sit behind that and where you're getting them from and where the sources are and the timeliness of those sources and the efficacy of them, and then underneath that making sure that the processes and the data inputs underpinning that are really rich and really robust to make sure that you're getting that really good quality data all the way through. And so those dashboards are instantaneous and live, but it's that kind of under the iceberg methodology of all that work that has to go on underneath it to be able to get that view.
I couldn't agree more. One of the challenges I had when responsible for the data for the care organisation in the past was getting that good data and getting it in. And it's often being keyed in by care assistants, the nurses, the people that are busiest, doing the most in the homes with the least time for tech often. And you're like, hey, it really does matter what you put in, what you put in this box. And one of the angles I found really useful, and I'd be interested in everyone sharing sort of their experiences, is really explaining the why. Like you've touched on dashboards and we talk about, the board want to sit and look at the data and do these things. But for me, it was a dashboard to me has to be actionable. I don't want to look at a graph or a chart or some numbers and go, it's got to be, so what? Is that, and this is one of the things we talk certainly with our customers, and I'd be interested in your approach from the compliance angle, is like, yes, we can put that in a dashboard, we can help you, but why? As in, and it's not challenging or not be rude, but it's just getting people to stop thinking about, I have a report to show someone. It's like, what action, how is this report going to better the care for your residents or better the lives of your staff? What actions can you take based on the information? That's something I feel really strongly about. And if you get that explained to people at all levels, I think it helps with the data collection, the data capture, because people understand the impact of what they're doing and how that can help. I'd be interested in your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that kind of start with the why. And we almost, when we're speaking with our customers, will say, well, let's start with what it is you want to see and work back from that rather than building it up the other way. And understanding what you want to track and why you want to track it is really important. But then adding that layer on to be able to say, well, this is what I'm tracking and why. And then actually, did it work? And did it make the improvement we thought it would? And if not, let's change or tweak and keep that agile improvement process going and use tech to be able to support that, because we know everybody does that in a human form, but the tech should be underpinning that and allowing people to do that really easily. And I really firmly believe, and forgive me if I'm going off tangent here, but until you can get to that point as an organisation, it's really tricky to start talking about AI or predictive analytics or all these other cool things that are there for everyone to take advantage for. But without the foundations underpinning it, it's I can't remember who had this scenario, but it's like putting a conservatory on, when there's no walls on the external of the house. It doesn't have that benefit. It's really kind of having those building blocks in place that's the most appropriate route, in my opinion.
I completely agree. Lou's weighed in on the chat, and I think to say something there, so for those that may not be able to see it, she's saying they've managed to replicate some forms in a care management system, and they're capturing lots of good data by the sounds of it, but they're not immediately able to those forms to be able to action that data. It still needs to be read by a person. I think we talk about this digital transformation journey. I think it's really interesting. I think Rhian's talking there about the end of it and the AI, the really powerful time-saving things that may be possible, and are possible with something. But it's like, if we're at the beginning of the journey, it's number one, capture data capture data in a structured fashion so that it becomes easier to start to report on and drive these insights from. And that often can come down to the tooling around how are you capturing the data? Is it clean, reportable data? Is it lots of free text? Is it like what's going on there? Looking at that first, because that data capture leads to the whole rest of the journey. Then what can you report on? And then when we start talking about AI and some of these other systems, like what can you glean from it? It all comes from a combination of how easy to use is that data. Well, that was quite cool. I made a little love heart. How easy to use is the data, and then what tools you have available to start representing that.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the point before about people wanting to be able to see. It makes life easier if you understand why you're collecting the data. So when you're busy and when everything's you're up against it, if you know why you're collecting it, it's easier and you're more inclined to want to do it. But again, I showed you my age by talking about neighbours, but in my career, the amount of data input projects I've seen across all of health and social care, I dread to imagine the warehouses that exist and the volumes of data that exist out there, because we've had this, I don't know, this just focus on collecting information, and no one brings it to life and no one activates it. And so I really think that the one thing we need to get to the point of doing is flipping that on its head to collect very little data, maybe just collect the really pertinent pieces. It might be one or two things, but really bring that to life and start to understand the why and then act on it.
I love
but yeah, challenge for anyone who can guess how many data warehouses are sat out there in the world with all this data being protected, but not necessarily utilised.
That's a really interesting point. I guess that's capitalising on if a dashboard should be actionable as a reason for making it in the first place. The data you're capturing should impact that in the first place, right? It's not capturing data for data's sake. It's like, cool, you want to know this. Why? What can we do with it? And reducing that down. So it's like if you are in a place where you can only have a small amount of it, not a small amount of impact, that's unfair. If you're in a place where you don't necessarily have a huge amount of resources, like prioritize what you do capture so that you can have an impact with it.
Yeah, and understand that if it's been captured somewhere else already, because there's nothing more soul destroying than, you know yourself, if you go through some kind of life admin you've got to do and fill a form in and you get 20 forms that are all asking the same piece of information slightly differently in a different format, and it's just disrespectful to people doing that work at the front line. So there's a job in it, and I don't know what this role is or who owns the role, but there's the role of being able to analyse all that and pull it together and make sure that everyone knows and has this map of where you can get the data from in the first instance, rather than this constant duplication, which I think all of our frontline colleagues are up against daily.
I completely agree. Going back to that tech ecosystem, even in the simplest form, is I believe in order to run an excellent care organisation, there are different systems. There is no one solution that's going to come in and be the best at everything. You need this ecosystem, you need this group, but you want it to be streamlined from the point, even just creating a user. As you say, like life admin, that's in its simplest form, right? It's normally name, probably where they are, and some level of maybe access or idea of role. If you're putting that in 20 places for 100 employees, 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees, the amount of admin that starts. So it's just, when going in with these systems, it's worth knowing essentially who talks to who, to some degree. Like, what can we share? How can we make our life easier, and not having a HR department running down this corridor thinking about, and a compliance department. You want that umbrella, somebody that's looking at them all and how we knit them together.
A colleague that on this earlier meeting this morning was talking about having that kind of data library or data glossary that's published per organisation or health system that actually says, you know, these are all the different places you can get data from, and when you have a request, tell me where you think this data is going to come from and we can go and source it. And maybe that's something we need to start to build into all of our kind of programmes and rollouts.
That makes lots of sense. I'd love, Christina, we've got the slide for, it tells us a little bit more about Radar. I'd love to get this up to talk, whilst we're talking about sharing data and sort of the different, we were talking a little bit yesterday, Rhian, about the different ways that Radar particularly is able to share, like receive data, what it can do with it, and how it actions. I'd love you to talk to this if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So forgive the really dry slide, but when we were trying to document what radar is and how it works, this is the kind of easiest way we can get it all on the screen, because as a radar system, we started life as compliance tools. We've got activity tools, which is for if any of my radar colleagues are listening and use radar, it's the incident management, it's the ability to map a workflow engine within your system to map your business process. So if you log an incident within radar, it can map your business process and mimic that and activate that within the system. And then we've got the quality compliance tools that sit on the other end of it, the third pillar of that journey. So you've got your kind of compliance, the activity around that, and then what you're doing proactively to measure the quality. And all of those three tiers of information can feed up into our reporting and analytics framework, so you can start to get those views across organisation as to where your quality and safety is and where your issues are and what you're doing about them and how you're acting on them and all the good stuff that we've been discussing already. So that's the kind of radar ecosystem. But Mark, our Chief Product Officer, and the team worked with Innovate UK on a piece of work a few years ago about, well, how do we activate that and start to use that for all these different systems that will have some impact on either quality, safety or risk and events in their own right, or will have data to be able to look at quality, safety and risk and really give that fulfilled wider picture. So it fits into my earlier point of there's kind of two elements that you can feed in and out of the radar system. One is our open input API. So we've got use cases of care planning systems. I can see colleagues on the list from care planning software systems whereby you can log an incident in a care planning software and that can auto-generate an event within radar, trigger the associated workflow and take you through that process and feed into the analytics. So we have this transactional API for bringing data in. So in the use case for you guys, when we've talked about it, we talk about things to do with, if someone's breaching working hours, or perhaps if someone's just worked loads of hours consistently month on month on month, it can trigger an event type from within Sona and log that within radar and set off the relevant workflow and notify the relevant people. So we've got that transactional way of being able to bring data in from any willing provider, really, as long as there's a use case for it. And then at the analytics level, we've got the ability to start to just look at the data sets with each other. And I'd be interested to hear from colleagues on the call as to where you see the use case best applied. But, when Richard and I chat, we kind of come up with a scenario that it's probably super pertinent to be able to see it at a data level, to be able to really know what's going on across an organisation and know exactly, like we say, what your skills mix was on a given time, what who your workforce were, what the agency usage were, and look at that against training records and compliance records and volume of incidents and what audits were saying, to get that complete picture for either a service or an organisation as to what's going on. I don't know if that's too much of a whistle-stop tour of quite a dry diagram, Richard, but I think I'll not go into any more detail in this call.
That was fantastic. The bits I want to pull out and shout there is it's a piece around sort of some of these next generation tech companies that are out there trying to help, where you've got these open APIs and you can receive that activity tool. So as you say, whether it's Sona passing in information around this student's worked too many hours, or this person's just worked 20 hours straight, or whether it's a fridge passing in the fact that its temperature's dropped, or whatever it may be, just being able to receive that transactional data. I think it's so powerful. More things are built in such a way where the information can be easily shared. And then the fallback almost I like is actually just at a data level. These things are interesting to see against each other. You could start to imagine things like just how many incidents happened and how many staff were in the building. If you start to plot those two things next to each other in a data warehouse, you immediately start to see, we've seen customers before that start to look at, my falls are all happening during handover. I need to change what my handover time is. But you start to see when you're mapping these two things over the top of one another.
The extra cool bit on this that we've not managed to shoehorn into the diagram, but for the next time someone sees this diagram, I'm going to try, is we've got a methodology within our analytics called Pulse that lets you watch and specifically say, right, actually out of all this dashboard after dashboard of data set. You can drill into this one specific thing. I'm really worried about this one specific home or one specific ward or area within it. I want to watch, and I'm going to set this threshold, and I want to have an alert the minute that something breaches this threshold. So you can put that watch on something, and then you can close off the loop, and that watch can link back into our API and trigger an event in its own right to go, actually, this area that we've got on kind of red alert, something's happened, trigger off these notifications and all that different process. So you've got that kind of loop of being able to constantly watch what's happening and drill and control to the level of detail that you think is appropriate. And that's totally owned by the user.
Fantastic. That's great.
So, answers on a postcard for anyone that can see how I shoehorn that into the diagram.
I love it. Changing tack slightly, we've touched, I think we've said the word skills sort of half a dozen times or so on the call. It's something that's become so important to our customers. It's something we've spent a reasonable amount of time working on. I've been looking at, you've always got so-and-so can do this shift. I'm qualified to be a care assistant. I can pick it up. But now more and more people we talk about the quality of data. As soon as you've got a good base layer of data, people want a little bit more. And we've started talking about, sure, I might be a care assistant, but to be in the building at this time, I need to be medication trained, or I need to have a certain level of moving and handling, depending on the residence or what it may be. So one of the things Sona spent a lot of time doing at the moment is being able to have those skills additionally on shifts. So it's like, yes, of course you're working as a carer, but specifically I need someone that can also do X, Y, and Z. And I guess what gets really fun and powerful about that when we start bringing this data together as well is it's more enriched when it comes to triggering alerts or triggering things in something like Radar, where you can start to see more around, we talked about agency and the mix of stuff, but that real skills mix, like, did I have enough people? Was that training was it in date? Were those people up to date with what they needed to be and when they were in the building at any given time? And I guess receiving that sort of information, again, just enriches everything you can do in Radar.
Yeah, and it helps you know exactly where to pinpoint your efforts and what you need to look at. Because if you're bringing that data in and you're seeing, well, actually, there's a correlation. I've had more incidents, but actually when I looked at my skills mix at the time didn't have this training requirement for whatever reason, you've got the answer then, and you're able to kind of close off that loop and start to look at making sure these things happen. So as much as you can correlate the elements that you know present risks and add those as incidents and be able to pull those through, you're able to look at that information and start to see exactly where you need to investigate and where you need to put your energies. It's also worth, again, not wanting to kind of drift too far off topic, but starting to look at that from a regulator point of view, to be able to say to a regulator or a commissioner, look, I don't just show you the number of incidents I've got. I don't just tell you after something's happened and report on what my investigation might be. This is how I proactively manage it all, and you can have a view too, and you can see what I see, to make sure I'm always monitoring and checking and proactively managing what's happening. And that is really, really powerful to be able to pull that, whether it's CQC data or commissioner data or whatever that might be, to have those complete views.
That's a really powerful lens to look at it through. I agree. And again, it's one of the things, see, we're talking here a lot about compliance. When we talk about training and skills, it'd be remiss not to mention sort of LMS systems. And again, traditionally, certainly back when I was in care, that was very standalone. That's over here, and that was, I can report on my training stats. And it's actually, by pulling that into the roster, you can show much richer view in the roster. But then again, by pulling that then into something with your compliance and the triggers, it's just back to this idea of an ecosystem. The more joined up there can be, the better visibility you have at all levels. Here's a nice broad question for you, Rhian. How can organisations avoid breaches? So if you talk, I guess in Radar there are dozens, hundreds. Let's pick a couple. What have you seen work particularly well across maybe a couple of topics that you'd like to talk about, a couple of breaches, and what's an effective way of reducing them, in your opinion?
So by far it's monitoring the emitters. So you've got your extreme kind of incidents that happen. Everybody manages that, monitors that, follows a relevant process. You get learnings from that. But by nature, they're usually extreme because they're incidents, and they're usually the kind of on that far end of, in hospitals, they're called never events. the things that should never happen and they're at that far end of the spectrum. So if you can be really proactive and have the time to use this data and use this information to record and then analyse near misses, that's one of the most powerful things you can do to start to prevent, because you can start to investigate, well, it nearly happened, why did it nearly happen, what was it we need to look at, was the skills mix right, was everybody trained, did we have all the information we need, was it a certain agency, what was the thing that happened, and you can almost proactively fix it before it becomes a real incident or breach. So that by far, and I know in an ideal world, having time is the biggest thing. Time to look at what might happen is really difficult when everybody is so busy and so time poor on the front line, but it's probably one of the most powerful things to be able to do to avoid things becoming future incidents.
That makes lots of sense. It's about trying to break the circle. When you're really reactive, you're fixing the problems that are happening, but you're busy doing that, and so the incidents keep happening and you keep dealing with it. If you can try and break that and get it actually what isn't happening, what's nearly going wrong, how do we fix the systemic issue? And again, I guess without sounding too much like a broken record, you need to know, step one is knowing where they're happening, right? It's like buying the time absolutely to look at it, but step one is, and maybe this touches on Lou's point again in the chat, is like you need to capture enough information to know what's going on, and that also, it doesn't always have to be quantitative, right? Near misses, especially, I think certainly from my time, there's a huge amount of qualitative data just in the staff's heads, and it can be like, hey, I've got these numbers, these things have happened, or like, what do you think? Like, again, it's often, you don't want to become too focused on the systems, the numbers and the charts. In my opinion, there's always the carers on the ground are the ones that know the most often about some of these things. And it's like, if you've got the time, if you've got the ability, the data may lead where you have a conversation, but go and have those conversations with the staff as well.
Absolutely, and there's probably two themes to that, if I can touch on briefly. One is around going back to our original discussion about the volume of information. Let's spend more time understanding what's happened rather than the volume of collating. If we could take some of that burden away and recombine it into looking and analysing those near misses, that would be really powerful. And understanding from that the real pertinent things that would suggest there's something needed looking at. And in my opinion, from what you see, the things that you read, that actually, if you are listening to what frontline teams are saying, if you're listening to what service users and patients are saying, if you're looking at what the workforce was and the training levels of the workforce, and if you look at the number of incidents, you've got a fair enough chunk of data sets there to be able to point to where potential risk might be or where near misses might be and know what to investigate. And so your point about having that kind of anecdotal information, we feed that into our analytics to have the qualitative and quantitative beside each other, because there's some really rich insights just coming from kind of the free text used, or poor culture, cultural fear might come up time and time again and not be logged or given as the reason for any specific incident or near miss, but it's there. And so we can kind of pull that out and expose that to mean, okay, this is something we need to look at further. And then what is that telling me about everything else and all the other data sets, to get that real kind of detailed, like you say, areas of where you want to look further, not spending hours looking for data to give you an answer, because it never will.
Yes, that's, again, I spent a long time maybe a personal learning, and I'm sure there's lots of people that are way ahead of me on this journey on the call now, but there's no silver bullet, right? You're looking for that right number, that right piece of data to go, this is the problem, this is what I need to solve. It's like, very much, I now believe the data from whatever system and wherever guides you to, this is an anomaly, or this is irregular, or this is something. But also the flip side, one of the favorite exercises, we spend a lot of time talking about what's gone wrong and near misses. Again, it often comes down to time, but you can spin it on its head. And where aren't they happening? Mm-hmm. Where isn't anyone? Again, if you've got multiple homes maybe, or even different times of shifts, like what is different about that situation, as opposed to constantly looking at the problems? It's like, it's going really well over here. What can we apply there that's going to then benefit the staff or the residents or whatever it may be in another place? We spend a lot of time talking about the problems, I guess, or talking about the data you can capture about what's going wrong. But the flip side of that is where there isn't a spike in a graph, for instance, there's a nice low bit. And it's like, what's going on there that makes that a success?
Yeah, absolutely. And that culture of sharing is so important, of being able to expose what worked, what didn't work, and also a culture of sharing things that have happened, but how they were reverted, and that freedom to be able to kind of go, oh, that wasn't quite right, this is what we're doing. Because to your earlier question about, how do you stop, I think you, I know I'm taking you verbatim, but I think you used the phrase, how do you stop breaches happening? And you just can't. It's humans, it's a human machine, but what you can do is do everything within your power to prevent them. And so, yeah, learning is absolutely one of those features.
Exactly that. And it comes on to, I've got sort of one piece here is more around, I guess, the staffing, but I'm interested in your take. So we touched on it earlier, being continuity of service. And I think, again, anecdotally, at least one assumes continuity of service may lead to continuity of good service, at least may lead to less accidents, less incidents. And it's how can we support providers with that continuity of service? But I guess the first thing is validating that assumption. And again, that's where the data can guide you. Is actually, are these happening because we've got lots of agency or lots of new staff in, or is it actually something different? You want to get to the bottom of that first. And then it's just, I guess, for me, it comes back to visibility, right? Is that the problem? Where are these alerts flagging? Agency, for instance, is often something that you look at the month after, right? If I paid it, how much agency? Oh, that was the bill. And it's actually, I think the idea we talked about, these triggering things in Radar, becomes much more powerful to know, more than half of my staff, say, on a shift at any given time, or more than X percentage happen to be agents. And that slightly more real time feels more pertinent to be able to address things, perhaps, which I guess is the other thing of these ecosystems. Like the quicker you can look at the data, the quicker you can action it, maybe, and the more you can drive change. Do you think that holds true?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about the continuity of care that's really important, but it's more about the support we give to deal with fractures in continuity that's even more important, and the data can definitely show that. So, but also certainly within Radar, there are tools there to help support if there's a break in continuity. So around even just, an agency person coming in, if they're completing something, through, we've got this kind of context sensitive way of being able to link to the relevant policy, procedure, training guidelines, alerts that pop up, guidance that pops up. We've seen scenarios where people will complete audits as training, so they can't go on shift on a ward or in a home until they've gone through a kind of training audit that links them live to all the different elements in the system where they need support or might need information, because it's being able to use the data to tease out what are the symptoms of lack of continuity, rather than just saying, lack of continuity is the issue. It's what are the symptoms and how do we fix those, and how do, the diagnosis, and then what the remedy is.
I completely agree. I like this question. This is low prep for Rhian, but I enjoy we talked a little bit about AI and some of the good stuff, and we're talking about data. We talk about the now, and I appreciate for perhaps many of the customers watching this at the moment. As I say, everyone's in a different place in the journey, and it's important to think about, actually, I don't need to jump to the end. Like, let's pick the systems that are going to have the biggest impact. Let's put things in place. I think it's a given now, certainly when you look at the government and regulators, that digitalizing the industry is inevitable. I don't think many people, you won't get away, won't be expected to hold on to pen and paper, I don't think, anymore. I think we're past that. So I think the journey has to start for everyone, but everyone at the moment will be in different places. And that's fine. And that makes sense. And don't shoot for the end is my advice. But what is, not the end, but what does 5 years look like? What do you think this sort of space starts to look like in 3 to 5 years? You touched a little maybe on AI and some things like that. I'd just be interested in your steer on what you think the future might hold.
I've got a really boring answer for this. It's so boring because, again, in my history, that some of these cool things in tech have existed for a long time, since, back when I was watching Neighbours, people were coming up with these ideas. Interoperability was up there as a concept. So to be able to take true advantage of the tech, I think we've got to get better systemically at how we prepare ourselves for the rollouts, how we prepare ourselves to be interoperable, how we get the right stakeholders around the table, how we get the right people talking, how we get the right things mapped and start working more from that kind of perspective. So actually in 5 years' time, I would see more around the roles of having those kinds of specialists being able to map all this and pull those stakeholders together. And I know it exists in different guises and you get different PMOs and all these pieces, but that real kind of understanding that we have a fracture at the moment in the system where frontline teams have more and more stuff. And I really do mean stuff. Here's an app for this, here's an app for that. Remember you log on for this, remember you log on for that. And you can kind of almost see them. But I'm busy trying to care and do what my vocation is. So we've got a culpability as providers to step back from that and provide a seamless journey for frontline teams so it doesn't matter to them. It's one log on and it's all seamless and everything's presented to them in the way that they need it when they need it. And there's tech providers, there's a willingness and there's really cool tech there, but it's about those people getting together with the right stakeholders, map how it looks and take that work away. So, because at the minute it feels, in my opinion, like it's often pushed back onto the frontline teams, kind of, oh, here's all your different systems, off you go, and there's loads of stuff in there you can expose. So it's having somewhere in the middle to be able to expose all that and pull it together as a real program that's elegantly passed back to the frontline teams to really help them operationally.
I completely agree. There's a fantastic. Sorry, I got distracted. There's a fantastic comment by Michael in the chat, which I'm going to pivot back to in a minute. But just to finish off, what you were saying there, and to bring it back, I guess. Here we're talking. It's called the art of the possible. How to go to reports, from reports to strategies. And I like what you touched on. Then is like let's start at the very beginning before you get the reports. Is like that should be. Getting that information, it should be easy for the care staff. No one gets into care. I've not heard a single person at interview go, I can't wait to get into care because I really want to use 12 different systems. I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to get all my logons and remember. It's not a thing, right? You get into care. It's wonderful people, and they want to help. They want to give. And sometimes we need to face it. I've been called out on these webinars before being a bit idealistic. There's also a good portion of people maybe they want a job. They need something to do. They want to bring an income in, but they don't want the tech. They don't want the friction. So step one of getting a good strategy is happy workforce is getting you the information you need, but only the information you need. Which starts to wrap up all of our threads, right? It's like, make it easy to capture what you want to capture, make reports that make sense, that are actionable. From those reports, you can then start to drive these strategies. And that depends on organizations, I guess, like us, as you say, working together and getting that approach. And I don't know about yourself, but I'd love your take on working with partners. It's really easy for us to jump on a webinar and chat and share some ideas and hopefully help certainly sow some seeds and thought in the people watching, but it's still all driven by the customers, right? It's you guys watching have the knowledge and the understanding of, hey, this would be that this sits in Radar, this sits in Sona, or this sits in a care planning system, this sits in an LMS, and I want to pull it together to achieve X and Y, and ask. It's like, certainly now I think tech's slightly different than it was maybe 10, 15 years. Talk to the providers, explain what it is that you're trying to achieve, and we partner certainly with our customers to work towards achieving that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. But it gets fractured when we've got to get ways of being able to pull customer voices together, because when you get that many to one, it kind of almost sometimes as tech providers, oh, well, which do you start with and how do you choose? So we've got to get a way of being able to pull together those customer voices, which we're working with. We work with a lot of providers to be able to do, but pull them together en masse to come up with solutions that are kind of voted on en masse and have that way to make those decisions collectively, because otherwise, again, it can get flooded. So I think it's about getting those specialist groups together. We've talked about looking at, almost having a bit of a Dragon's Den type thing with customers where they present with challenges and a group of tech providers. They're all partners and all able to and willing to work with each other to go away and come back with a solution. And I think we maybe need to start coming at it from that point of view. To your very earlier point about, people want to see the data for why, we probably as tech providers need to be coming up with the solutions for why, not just because the good use of tech. I
couldn't agree more. There is some fantastic comments coming in the chat. I'll address them in turn. Michael rates a fantastic point that we've seen before. AI is certainly in the sector that's so heavily regulated, it's important to check, as he says, your information governance data protection officer, like, can I put this data into AI? You need to be aware, A, of the biases and what's going to come out, but B, potentially what are you feeding and how that data is going to be used. So just as a courtesy shout out to everyone, do be mindful. It's powerful, it's exciting, it is new, and I think sort of regulators and things are learning what will be possible, what can be done. So just in case anyone's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go and take all of this sensitive data and throw it at an AI bot, maybe think twice before doing that. But it will be interesting to see what providers such as us can do with that data in safe, regulated ways. And I really want to touch on Glenn's point. So it is, I think it must be, well, actually, I can speak from it being incredibly frustrating. In a 5-year period, I implemented a recruitment system, a HR system, a learning management system, a scheduling system, and then a compliance, built a compliance system. There's 5 different systems. The amount of work going out and finding and procuring, and then you end up in this fragmented world. And we do want to put it all together. Glenn makes the point. It's not always achievable buying brands to integrate. I guess what me and Rhian, putting words in your mouth slightly here, trying to say is like almost the right ones will. I truly believe if you're after the best scheduling system that makes the most sense for health and social care, and for your business that you can configure and build, that's one thing. And at Sona, we believe that ties so closely with HR and so closely with payroll that it's best not to separate those systems. If we've got the tech map, Christina, sorry, just as we wrap up. So we start to talk about these core systems that actually where you share so much information, and it's so dense, you want that all together. So from the point of view of Sona's aspirations, we really want to own that entire employee stack. Here we go. So we look at the bubbles there. You've got the red, yellow, and green, and the blue for the engagements. That's scheduling, payroll, HR. When it comes to the wider care piece, the compliance is huge, and it is very separate. And again, the best compliance systems and things that can do that. Well, we've got Rhian here on the call. Like that's not something that's in Sona's appetite. Just to be clear, when it comes to what we want to help health and social care deliver excellent workforce, but we believe there are natural crossovers and natural integrations that are possible. So I think as a provider, my guidance would be you want to reduce the number that you need, which is why a procurement process, you want that zoomed out view, right? You want how can we buy essentially the fewest systems to minimize that data crossover. But I think we do need to accept that to deliver an optimal experience for your staff, for your residents, there is going to be some degree of needing multiple systems. And it's picking perhaps the best in breed across there and ones that are willing to interoperate. And I think I asked Rhian what the next 5 years look like. Giving my 2 cents worth, I think that's what we start to see more and more organizations like Radar, like Sona, that are saying, hey, we're here to work together. And to Rhian's point, trying to get that joined up customer voice to help steer into a way that we can share, not just share data, but integrate systems in a way that makes it easy to deliver exceptional care, or easier to log and deliver exceptional care and look after the workforce. That's quite a long soliloquy for me, which I try and avoid. Rhian, so anything to add in there?
No, I think it's an interesting point to make about when you're going to market for systems. I absolutely would always have interoperability as a must-have, not because all providers should offer an element of interoperability, and in scenarios in other markets where you see that not happening, what you end up is this kind of death of innovation, for want of a better breed, because you need everyone to be interoperable and you need competition in markets to keep everyone moving forward. So that would be my watch. Make sure you're pushing for the people who are like up for the challenge of being in a competitive market.
I like and challenge. My one again advice, Glenn. Interoperability is it's actually not an easy word to say, ironically, but it's a really easy thing to talk about. Our data is available. It's like really challenge people. What does that look like? I use this system. What do you know about this system? How are they going to? Don't always take it at face. It's something. It's very easy to give a very loose answer about our data is available. The success of any good integration is how clearly defined it is and how easy it is to draw those boundaries, as per this map and some of the pieces that me and Rhian have been talking about today. So it's really understanding what does it look like before you end up buying 3 systems that said they could talk, but actually because one's written in language X and one's in language Y, maybe they don't talk as well as you thought in the first place. So yeah, challenge those providers and say, hey, what does my world look like with this? And really try and get to the root of that wherever possible. I can see Christina typing. There we go. She's directing someone. Are there any other questions or thoughts from the audience at this point? And then I'll hand over to Rhian for some sort of closing remarks to wrap up nicely. And I'm just reading, so I'm taking the opportunity to read Michael's fair here. I completely agree. It's trying to gather everything in one place and share it all. And I think for CQ, again, when it comes to regulation and compliance, the easier you can make somebody's job when they're inspecting you, the better all round. It's like, hey, here's all of the things that I have here, and Rhian touched on, not just here's the reports, here's what I'm doing about it, here's how I've understood it, here's why I've captured this stuff, here's what I'm showing you. If we can collate that all in one place, I think that it makes life easier to be inspected. It makes life an inspection shouldn't be a concerning time. It should be, hey, I've got all of the things that you're coming here to see. I know I'm doing an excellent job, and I can't wait to show you what that looks like. I appreciate it's not always straightforward to get to that place. And we talk again just about how busy people can be, but that's got to be the goal. Anything for you, Rhian, to wrap up and see if any more questions come through?
I think that I'm just there's something in the chat about the being able to interpret the data that's presented as well, and I think that ties into what my final point would be. It's about that, starting with the output, starting with the why, what you want to see, documenting how you get the information, the process, so on and so forth. And then that makes it really clear as to how that data can be interpreted. So you've almost got a kind of interpretation tool that goes with each of the dashboards or graphs or data sets that you've got to say, this is how you use it and why. And that's my summarising thought, that this is so much more work than just pulling together a screen of graphs and lines for the sake of having them. It is much more about really understanding what you want to see and what you want to investigate. And if you get that right and that foundation right, the platform then means that you can start plugging AI in, and you can start plugging faster and quicker and more ethical ways to get that information out. But it's probably starting with that legwork, and that comes from getting those stakeholders around the table, not just partners, but partners who are our colleagues as customers as well.
Fantastic. I quite agree. I think that wraps things quite nicely from my perspective and brings us to a sensible close. Christina, happy to hand back over to you. Before I do, just a huge thank you from me, Rhian. This has been a lot of fun. It's been great over the last few days as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to our lovely guests. Those were some amazing comments. As always, great conversation. We'll be sending over the recording in short time. And yes, thank you so much for joining, and hope we see you next time as well. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you all.